You're listening to Speaking of Faith with Bishop DeDe Duncan Proby of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. I'm Rachel Ravelette, or RomComm, and we're glad you're here.
Welcome, friends, to Speaking of Faith with Bishop DeDe. Our eagle-eyed and eagle-eared, maybe? I don't know. An animal that hears really well. Listeners will be able to tell you that I am not Bishop DeDe. I am, in fact, Rachel Ravelette, or RomComm, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Central New York. If you don't know where that is, as Bishop DeDe says so beautifully, it's from Canada to Pennsylvania, Utica to Elmira, and all the beautiful people and places in between. Today we have a special episode that's really, if you are not a member of our diocese, you might think, this doesn't sound like speaking of faith. But what we're going to be doing today is talking about how we live out our faith as a diocese and what it means to be a diocese. And so we're going to be talking kind of about the practical aspects of how we do ministry together. I'm joined today by some wonderful people. You will recognize a couple of them, and I have a new face and a new voice for you as well. First of all, welcome back, Canon Megan Castellan. Megan is Canon to the Ordinary, which means she is Bishop DeDe's right-hand person for mission and formation, I believe. But maybe a lot more right now. if that feels a little limiting, maybe in just its description.
I like to explain it as Canon to the Ordinary helps the bishop with anything they don't want to do or don't have time to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You and Bishop are both very, very busy with the ministry of the diocese. Another very busy person in the ministry of the diocese, someone who filled in for me a couple weeks ago. Thank you, Adam. Adam is our program coordinator and secretary of convention. Adam is also all about diocesan ministry. We're a pretty tight-knit team, and he's an important part of it. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Rachel. It's so good to be here.
And a new voice and face for you all today. If you are a member of our diocese, though, you know this person and you love them. It is the wonderful Karen Anderson. Karen, you are at St. James Clinton, is that right?
That is correct. And thanks for having me.
Glad you could be here. All right, so we're going to talk today, like I said, a little bit about what diocesan ministry is, what shape it takes, and how we try to live that out here in the Diocese of Central New York. So first, I wonder, Canon Megan, could you tell us a little bit, in an ideal world, what is a diocese and how is it to function?
So a diocese is one of these ideas we have that has existed in the church since Nicaea. It's one of the older ideas we have in the church. And the idea is that it was easiest to organize the church in terms of geography. So you would have your local church community, those people that you gathered every week with in your little neighborhood. And then you would organize churches together in some sort of geographic region. And then the bishop would be the person who could kind of oversee the geographic region. And the Council of Nicaea, way back in 323, first time all of the church leaders got together and started figuring out how they were going to keep order in Dodge, said, okay, we're going to have things called dioceses, which is how we're going to organize the church throughout the world, these different geographic areas, and we're going to have one bishop per diocese. And if you want to go into another diocese to function as any sort of leader, you need to get that bishop's permission. That's how we're going to set things up, these geographic boundaries. As the church kind of grew and changed and sort of developed different denominations, other denominations developed sort of variations on this theme. So like our Lutheran siblings have really huge synods, is what they'll call them. The Baptists, our American Baptist siblings, you can affiliate with I think they're called cooperatives. I'm not sure the term they use, but you can affiliate based on affinity. So if you have some sort of like political affinity with a group, or if you have some theological affinity with a group within the Baptist denomination, then you can join with a group. And so our local American Baptist Church in Ithaca affiliates with a group, I think in the Midwest. But that's their kind of partner. The goal of Diocese in the Episcopal Church is both for kind of organization and also to help churches do together what they cannot do by themselves. It's an idea called subsidiary. The idea being that particularly in places where your local neighborhood church is not huge, where they don't have a lot of money or resources, the next level up can pool resources on a level that will help you be able to do stuff that you can't do yourself. So, particularly in Central New York, we have a ton of really small churches. We have a ton of churches in places where we don't have a lot of Episcopalians. Maybe we used to have a lot of them, we don't now. Maybe it's a place where, for whatever reason, we really want to keep Episcopal or progressive Christian ministry going, but there's no way to make it financially feasible, like college ministry. I don't know if you know this, college students are broke. They're not going to pledge. They're not going to be able to pay a chaplain, but it's important. Right. I was a college chaplain. Yeah, those kids aren't going to be able to kick into the offering plate, but it's vital to have college ministry. It's vital to have armed forces ministry at Fort Drum. It's vital to have ministry in places in these tiny rural communities where there probably isn't a progressive Christian voice, and there needs to be. And so part of what the diocese can do is pool the resources from churches that have massive endowments, churches that have a ton of people and resources and time, and say, how do we work together to make sure these places that aren't sustainable on their own have what they need to keep going? How do we work together to make sure that our group priorities are carried out? And how do we talk to each other to help us remember that the world is bigger than any of our one perspective? It can be easy for churches that have a lot of resources, a lot of people, to kind of become insular and sort of self-directed. Don't mean that in a bad way, but it's just sort of something that happens. So one of the gifts the kind of wider church can give us is a reminder that it's not just about us, thank God. It's a reminder that we constantly need to be taking into consideration other people's perspectives and experiences. So that big church is going to have to listen to their neighbor down the street who's had a radically different experience from them. The tiny rural church is necessarily going to have to listen to the mission chapel of South Sudanese refugees who have had a radically different life experience than them. One of our kind of core Anglican beliefs is that the truth of God is continually revealed to us through tradition, reason, and scripture. Part of tradition and part of reason is a reliance on the community around us. That God speaks not just through people who are dead now, but the ongoing revelation of community. And the broader diocese helps us do that, sometimes in really challenging ways, but mostly in really helpful ways.
So you talked a little bit about our shared priorities and our shared goals. And in the Diocese of Central New York, we've mentioned this a lot on this podcast, but I never get tired of saying it. Our vision for what we want the world to be is a world healed by love, and our mission, what we're going to do to help bring that vision to fruition, is learning to love God, one another, and all of God's creation. So that becomes really, those together become our ultimate decision filters for what are the priorities of our diocese. But those are necessarily broad, right?
Yes.
And we do not have what one would call a deep bench in our diocesan staff. So in addition to in addition to the bishop and the three of us, we have wonderful two other wonderful full-time colleagues, our controller Kathy, Sarah, who kind of just keeps the bishop and all of us on our toes, and then two fantastic part-time Debs. But that's a whole team of starters.
Yep.
So how can we do anything? What does that need to look like?
I mean, for one, I think we have an incredibly deep bench in terms of talent. Like you've just described,
That's fair.
An incredibly talented diocesan staff. And as someone who has spent a whole lot of time recently talking up the diocese to clergy I'm trying to recruit, one of the things I like to say is that we are scrappy. We are a scrappy diocese. One of the kind of great gifts of not having a whole lot of money is that you have to be inventive. And gosh darn it, we are inventive. We will find ways to do something. We will find those funding sources. We will figure out a workaround. We will find cheaper and more creative ways to do ministry. We will work together. We will think outside the box. We are good at that in Central New York. That talent has not been sort of atrophied by an over-reliance on material resources. And that's one of the reasons it's really fun to work here, because no one's ever like, we don't have enough, we can't do it. Everyone's like, we can figure that problem out. Let me add it. And we also have people who are scrappy. We have a really broad bench of empowered lay leaders and clergy who, because we don't have a massive diocesan staff, and I've worked in places that have a massive diocesan staff, are really able to say, hey, I have this great idea. What would it look like if we did X, Y, and Z? And then the staff is like, great, what do you need? Here, go do that thing. We will help. Do you need an email set up? Do you need a Zoom link for your meet? We will do that thing for you. Here, go do. We will send out an email to the clergy from the diocese. Go do that thing. And so there is a lot of opportunity here for, this is sounding like my sales pitch again. There's a lot of opportunity here for people who want to do creative, inventive ministry, both on the clergy level and on the lay level, in ways that there isn't always in other places, because there's just a lot of space and space to be inventive and creative, and room to think outside the box. And we have people in these churches who, even though you wouldn't immediately think so, the minute you explain to them, okay, we want to do this new thing, here's why we think it might work, here's why we think it might be fun, they're like, okay, let me see it, let me add it.
We love it.
And it's fantastic.
That's awesome. Adam, you've been with us since January, but already you have quite a bit of experience with just what Megan's talking about. Can you share a little bit about how you are a point person for people across the diocese who want to get involved in things, and how you're working with a few different ministries that we have going right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, especially as you and Megan, and of course as Karen is going to share about what we do together as a diocese, it makes me mindful of, we talked about this recently as a staff. If you pay attention to our diocesan emblem, that cross that we have, it talks about, it helps us focus on the necessity of all parts of the church. And if you look at that cross, there's 4 points, obviously. There's 4 points, obviously. And those 4 points stand for the 3 points of the clergy, so the diaconate, the priesthood, and the bishop. But that 4th point is so important, which is the importance of the laity, the people of the diocese. And if you pay attention to that, if one of those things is taken out, it all falls apart. And so it just harkens back to what Megan says about a need for reliance on one another. And so one of the things that I'm constantly mindful of, even though a lot of times our Roman Catholic siblings like to take ownership of great saints like St. Francis, but St. Francis, in his kind of origin story, there's this story about this motto that the Franciscans adhere to, which is to heal wounds, bind what is broken, and to bring home the lost. And one of the things that we really are trying to accomplish in diocesan ministry is to kind of echo that same ethos. And so one of the first things that we started coming on when I came on board is this ministry called Into the Light, which is this work that we're undertaking as the people of God to kind of destigmatize how we treat those who are experiencing substance use disorder. And for me, that's even something that was really important for me as somebody who grew up in a home with alcoholism, as somebody who has a sibling who has very much in the past struggled with drug use. I used to use a lot of terms that really kind of, without me intending to, dehumanized these people that I love so much. Like I always referred to my father, who I love with all of my heart, as an alcoholic, and thankfully he is working his program and he is working towards sobriety. Same thing with my brother. I used to always talk about him as a drug addict. But really, one of the things that was so important to me in this day away that we had for Into the Light was hearing Deacon K talk about referring to people as having substance use disorder and really helping them reclaim and retain their humanity. So that's what one of the things we're doing with Into the Light is helping people in parishes, big and small, who are needing help, really needing God's grace and mercy in how they respond to and can better love the people that they love with substance use disorder. And like you said, Megan, about how there can be some really small parishes, and especially in our section of the country in upstate New York, there are a lot of parishes. There's a lot of communities that struggle with substance use, and it can really ravage communities. And so our hope with Into the Light is, one, to make sure that people know that they're not alone, because being the loved one of somebody with substance use disorder can be super alienating. And especially in my family, we struggled for years about being able to be open and honest about what's going on in our own lives and going on in our own home, because we didn't want people to judge us. And again, just in my own experience, as somebody who I'm not going to violate anyone else's anonymity, but I can speak of my own experience. I'm, as somebody who goes to Al-Anon, I do 12-step work, because even though I don't struggle with substance use disorder, I definitely need help about how I can better be a husband and a father, a neighbor, a coworker, just a person. It's been really helpful for me to be able to talk openly about this stuff. Even a couple years ago, sharing with the three of you or any of you who are watching or listening, I wouldn't have been able to say these things. But understanding that these are still people. So one, helping those who feel alienated, and two, giving resources to communities, how we can best get you plugged in to community resources that can help you find help for those who are struggling with substance use disorder, but also how to find help for yourself. Because that's one of the most important parts, is taking care of oneself. Self-care is super important as we kind of navigate these very choppy waters, and making sure that you are taking care of yourself, because it could really take a lot out of you. Another thing that I'm super grateful and honored to be a part of is our Pride ministry here in the diocese. We obviously participate in the Central New York Pride March and event every year, but also ways that we can, as a diocese, as a people of God, honor the unique and infinite dignity of every person. And I'm maybe saying that a little tongue in cheek, especially over things that have been put out over the last couple of weeks. But one of the great things I've gotten to take a part of is recently on an episode of the podcast, I was able to be a part of the conversation between our bishop and several members of our community who are trans, especially in light of things that happen in our country, legislations that are being passed, perspectives that are very much different than some of ours. helping people remember that they are beloved by God and that they are not forgotten. And I think one of the great things about our heritage as our tradition as Episcopalians is we are very much interested. I like to say a lot all the time that we're very much interested in building much bigger tables and less high walls. We want people, everybody from every experience, every place in life to have a place at the table. And that is absolutely not limited to the LGBTQ plus community who have so much been marginalized and hurt by the church. And we as Episcopalians have a very unique or in a very unique position to welcome these people in and to make sure that they know first and foremost that they're beloved. They are loved by God and they are not forgotten. And one of the things I really love about how we express our faith is no one has to make a sinner's prayer or an admission of Jesus as their personal Lord and Savior to be a part of a community. I mean, like, obviously, we want people to know God and have a relationship with God, but there's no prerequisites or strings attached. There's no bait and switch. No one's trying to bring anyone in with flashy lights or shiny things and then being like, aha, now we got you. That's not what we're trying to do here. We want people to know as they are, without exceptions, without reservations, you are loved by God. So our Pride ministry is absolutely a vital part of making sure people know that they are loved. And then one of the new things that we're launching this summer, our bishop came to me and said, hey, we really want to work on how we can connect with youth. And what are some ways we can do that? And as we were talking and brainstorming and praying it over, she mentioned that she has somebody in her family that is a huge fan of Dungeons and Dragons, D&D. And my ears immediately perked up because as a young nerd, I was the shadow walker because a day walker because I kind of I played football and sports and stuff like that. But then also on the weekends, I was literally in my friend's basement. Well, okay, it wasn't literally in a basement, but like I grew up in Arizona, so we didn't have basements, but we had very dimly lit rooms with black lights and stuff. And we would play Dungeons and Dragons. And then I kind of gave it up for a while because like it's very niche and a little exhausting to stay involved with. But like many people, this was a new hobby that I picked back up as the pandemic hit, when we all kind of had to stay inside and stay away from people. Thank goodness for platforms like Zoom and all the other ways that we could stay connected remotely. My wife and I found friends online that played D&D. And so we had like a 3-year long campaign that we played to kind of help get us through COVID and being away from people. And then we just kind of stuck with it. And so I shared that with Bishop DeDe, and she's like, well, what about that? Like I have a kiddo that loves Dungeons and Dragons. Can we do that in our diocese? And I was like, this is fantastic. Because the great thing about playing D&D or systems like that, these tabletop role-playing games, is yes, it can kind of skew towards a younger demographic, but there are so many other people who are willing to sit down and learn about how to do this. And it sounds kind of corny, but it's the absolute truth. Using your imagination to connect with people, because that's the beautiful thing about D&D. The only limits to it are the things that you can come up with. And so this summer we're doing a learn and play event, how to learn the system of D&D and how you can play it, and then meet some new folks who are playing it, which is open to absolutely everybody. And fingers crossed, we had a great conversation with the folks here in Central New York at Retro Game Con, which is actually one of the largest retro video game and gaming conventions in the United States, are welcoming us in to run a D&D campaign, a one-shot campaign during Retro Game Con. So please stay tuned with us about how you can get connected with that. But these are just some ways that we're trying to make a bigger tent for people. We're trying to make sure that we want to, as much as possible, let people know who they are and know that these things about who they are celebrated here in our diocese. And even if it's just as weird and nerdy as, oh, I can play D&D with folks at a church. And again, there's no bait and switch, like we want to help churches set up these D&D groups, but nobody has to be formally a Christian to participate in this. Some of the best relationships that I've encountered with people in 20 years of ministry now is the folks who weren't Christians when we started, and even to this day aren't necessarily Christians, but they are so apt to show the love of God and that care of the Holy Spirit to folks, even though they don't necessarily do church on Sundays. So those are just a few of the things that we're trying to do. I guess you want to call it programmatically here in our diocese.
That's awesome. Thanks, Adam. So we're hearing about this model where there's interest and need in the diocese, across the diocese, in our different parishes, and Adam, you may have heard that and go, "Wow, Adam does everything," and Adam does a lot. But Adam is working with clergy and lay people across the diocese to make these happen. He is not. One metaphor we use a lot is we're not driving this bus, but we'll gas it up for you, and make sure that we'll kick the tires, we'll check the oil, we'll gas it up. We're gonna help support you so that you can drive this bus in this ministry. And one of the best examples of that, I think, is you, my friend Karen. I am no longer new to the diocese, but it's not that long ago that I was. And as a remote worker who lives in Michigan, one of the very first lay people that I met and got involved in some work with was you, Karen. And you're just a tremendous lay leader in our diocese in the area of racial healing. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how you got involved in racial healing ministry and what shape your leadership has taken in our diocese.
Well, first of all, thank you. And I think my involvement in diocesan work, it's funny, when I sat down and took some notes, you would think that Adam and Megan and I sat down together, because my notes are very similar to what they have already said about how a diocese works. And so a lot of my diocesan work happened because I am in a small parish and felt a little isolated in my call to anti-racism work, and had this opportunity to be able to share my passion for that with the diocese. And Bishop DeDe has been wonderful about encouraging and pushing me to take on leadership roles. And so out of this little parish in Clinton, New York, where I was somewhat isolated, I've had an opportunity to meet people across our diocese and work with folks across our diocese. And I worked on the Vision, Mission, Rule of Life Committee. And, just what a wonderful experience that was, to be able to really look at who we wanted to be as a diocese and what we were working towards. And then from there, got involved in the Sacred Ground pilgrimage to Alabama. And the pilgrimage to Alabama, I don't think could have happened had it not been for Bishop DeDe's dedication to this anti-racism work, because many of the folks who went on the pilgrimage had their trip helped financially by diocesan funding, and they would not have been able to go, and our trip would have been an entirely different trip had it not contained all of the folks who were there. So that was such an important piece, to be able to include as many people as felt called to go on the trip. And so when we went to Alabama, we visited Birmingham and Selma and Montgomery, and we had as diverse a group as we have in our diocese, and so got to share in the experiences of what different people experienced on that trip, and had time to have compline and have discussions every evening and be able to talk and share. And now our job is to spread that work and figure out where we can go from there. And our diocese, as has been stated over and over again, is comprised of many small parishes that maybe don't have a huge groundswell of enthusiasm to become the beloved community, but there are pockets of folks in all of our parishes who have the same call that I do, but don't know how to make it happen. And so my hope for our diocesan work is that we can partner together and build enthusiasm and build community and share our passion and share strategies and things that are working. Some of our bigger parishes are doing amazing work when it comes to anti-racism, but it's sort of isolated. It's only happening where they are because they have they have the folks to be able to put the group together. And some of our smaller parishes don't have that community. And so my hope is that as our diocesan work continues, that we can build towards creating all of our parishes where people feel valued. Not, we say you're welcome in the Episcopal Church. Well, I don't want people to just feel welcome. I want people to feel valued. I want people to feel like they can walk into any Episcopal church across our diocese and be valued regardless of what their background is, regardless of what their race is, regardless of what their sexuality is. That they are a valued child of God, and that they are contributing to the work that we're doing to create beloved community. And so, my dream is that our music is inclusive, that our liturgy is inclusive, that the sermons that we hear from the pulpit are inclusive, and that the first step of that is acknowledging our history. And by design, we have our education system in America is white privilege, and it was designed that way, and we were all brought up in a certain way and educated in a certain way. And the goal for me is not to sit back and lay blame, and the goal for me is not to make people feel guilty for the experiences that they have or have not had with white privilege. The goal for me is, how can we educate ourselves to understand that what we were educated about is not necessarily what most Americans experienced. And so,
Right.
how can we educate ourselves? How can we acknowledge our history, lament for our history, and then work towards creating that beloved community? And as you can tell, because I cannot talk about this without getting passionate, I just believe that is who we're called to in our baptismal covenant. I believe that's who we're supposed to be as Christians. And so I'm so grateful to Bishop DeDe and to our diocesan staff for the support that I have had and the encouragement that I have had to pursue this work. So my call to folks is, if you're out there listening and you are in our diocese and you want to figure out, how can we make this happen in my little parish in so-and-so New York? How can, I'm all by myself. What can I do? Well, call the diocese and they'll put us in contact with each other, and we will create, this community that can then spread that enthusiasm and change the way people see Christianity and change the way people see the church in Central New York.
Thank you, Karen. And I just want to make it super clear for our listeners that you embody not just the passion and the vision, but you get down in the nitty gritty. I mean, for our pilgrimage, you got us dinner reservations. You knew the tour guide, Terry Chestnut, that we needed to go with. You knew the details, and basically all we had to do was say, yes, Karen, whatever you need, here you go. And you did it. And last week on the podcast, Bishop DeDe talked about call and how each of us has a call. And I'm just so grateful for the faithful way that you're saying yes and listening to that in your life. Wonderful example. And yes, as Karen said, if you want to know how you can make something happen in your parish, if you have if you feel that call, if you're in that posture of discernment, feel that call to the work of Christ in racial healing, in connecting with youth, in pride, in creation care, in substance use disorder support, reach out to us in the diocesan office. You can find us online, all our contact information at cnyepiscopal.org. And we love to say, yes, go. So thank you again, Canon Megan, Adam, Karen, for being here today and for doing this Speaking of Faith with Bishop DeDe's permission, blessing. And for sharing how we live out our faith and speak our faith as a diocese here in Central New York. Friends, thank you for tuning in, and may you be blessed and be a blessing. Bye.
Thanks for joining us. Speaking of Faith with Bishop DeDe is a production of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. Our theme music is by Fleece Mob, and it's called A Bird in Hand. We use it with permission. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcasting app so that you can be the first to know when new episodes are available. If you like what you've heard here, please leave us a rating and review. If you don't like what you've heard here, we're sure you're still a wonderful person, but maybe don't leave us a review? Just kidding. We love honest feedback and questions. You can connect with us online between episodes at cnyepiscopal.org/podcast and on social media at cnyepiscopal. Blessings to you, friends.